Hey guys, today we're going to be learning how to write equations um, to represent multiple different missing pieces of information with the same variable or the same letter. Okay, an example of what I'm talking about is if I have like me and my sister, let's say I have X amount of pens. Okay, and she has 2 times the amount of pens that I have. If I have X amount of pens, the amount of pens she would have is 2X because she would have 2 times as many as I would. Okay, so we're going to be doing that. I'm just kind of walking through how we would set up that process. The school librarian, Mr. Marker, knows that the library has 1,400 books, but he wants to organize how the books are displayed on the shelves. Mr. Marker needs to know how many fiction, nonfiction, and resource books are in the library. He knows that the library has 4 times as many nonfiction as resource, half as many nonfiction as fiction. If these are the only types of books in the library, how many of each type are in the library? Okay, so we have some resource books. So first we're just going to start off with a tape diagram and then I'll show us how to use algebra. So resource books. This is how many resource books we have. All right, we have 4 times as many fiction as resource books. So if there's 1 box for resource, we should have 4 boxes for fiction. Okay, and then we have half as many nonfiction as fiction. So if there's 4 boxes for fiction, there should only be 2 boxes for nonfiction. Okay, we can use this visualization to help us with our algebra. So our most basic information we're given is resource books. We're not told how many times more or anything about those resource books. We're told that about the other types of books. So our most basic piece of information they give, the one that they give us the least amount of information for, the one that we would represent with 1 box is going to be our X. All right. Then if we are talking about resource books and fiction books would have 1, 2, 3, 4 times as many, which would be represented with 4x. Then we have some nonfiction books, and there's half as many nonfiction as there are fiction. So if there's 4x fiction, that means there would be 2x nonfiction. So when it asks us to write a relationship between resource books and fiction books, it would be 4x and x. 4x is our fiction, x is our resource. Represent the number of non-fiction books in the library algebraically. That would be our 2x. Okay, you can use this tape diagram if it helps you. You don't have to. If you can go straight to like x, 4x, and 2x, that's fine. Don't feel like you need to add in the step of drawing the tape diagram. That was just to help you visualize kind of what we're doing today. Okay, now when I was making this note page, I did take out some questions. So we're going to go back in and basically answer what they were going to ask us to do. They had just broken it down too much, I felt like, for you guys. So we're just going to go back in and write an equation real quick over on this side. Sorry, that was my dog. Sorry about that. My dog's just interrupted. Okay, so we're going to write an equation. So we know that the library has 1,400 books total. And we know that there's X resource, 4X fiction, and 2X nonfiction. Okay, and we know that that is all going to equal 1,400 books total. Okay, now what would we do with those resource books, fiction books, and nonfiction books to get the total amount of books? We would add them up. First step of solving this is going to be to combine like terms. Remember, an x is a 1x, so we have 1x plus 4x. That would give us 5x, plus 2x would give us 7x, equals 1,400. We want to get that x by itself, so to undo 7 times x, we divide by 7 to both sides of that equal sign. On this left side, it cancels out. We get x equals 200. What this means, remember X means resource. So what this means is that there are 200 resource books in the library. So if we go down, that's what letter C is asking us. Then they're going to ask us how many fiction books there are. Well, if X is 200 and fiction is 4X, we would do 4 times, and instead of doing 4 times X, we do 4 times 200, because X equals 200, to get how many fiction books there are. So fiction books in the library would be 800. Nonfiction, you could go back to the 2 and do 2 times 200, or you could remember that there was half as many nonfiction. So we could just say 400. Either way, you'd end up with 400 as your answer. Does the library have 4 times as many fiction books as resource? So is 200 times 4 800? Yes. And those are just questions that you can ask yourself when you're doing these types of problems to make sure that you're getting the right answers. Does the library have half as many nonfiction as fiction? Yes. Does the library have 1,400 books total? Well, 800 plus 400 is 1,200 plus 200. Yep, that does equal. So I'm just talking about those two numbers. 1,400. Okay, so we're good with that. All right. Now let's kind of solve a problem without all of those helpers in place. Indian Middle School wanted to add a new school sport, so they surveyed the students to determine which sport is most popular. Students were able to choose between soccer, football, lacrosse, or swimming. So we've got soccer, football, and I'm just going to kind of abbreviate that, lacrosse, and swimming. So we're going to kind of lay it out how that last problem was laid out with all of those different things listed out. All right. The same number of students chose lacrosse and swimming. Okay, so lacrosse and swimming are going to be the same numbers. I'm just going to put like a little connector to those so that we remember that later. The number of students who chose soccer was double the number of students who chose lacrosse. The number of students who chose football was triple the number of students who chose swimming. If 434 students completed the survey, how many students chose each sport? Okay, so they are comparing, sorry, I just realized that I connected lacrosse and soccer when I shouldn't have. I should have connected lacrosse and swimming because the same number of students chose lacrosse and swimming, not lacrosse and soccer. Okay. So when I read that next sentence, that did not make sense. So the number of students who chose soccer was double lacrosse. So let's say lacrosse, we don't know what that is, that's X. Okay, since lacrosse and swimming are the same, swimming would also be X. Students who chose soccer was double who chose lacrosse. So if lacrosse is X, soccer would be 2X because it's double, 2 times however many chose lacrosse. The number of students who chose football was triple the number of students who chose swimming. So remember, swimming is X, so football would be triple, which is 3 times the number of swimming, which is X. So 3 times X. The number of students, oh, I just read that. If 434 students completed the survey, how many students chose each sport? All right, so what we are going to do is we are going to make this into an equation. So we'd add up all of these amount of people who voted for these sports, and it's going to be equal to the 434 students who voted. So we'd have 2x plus 3x plus x plus x equals 434. We're going to combine some like terms. Remember, those lone x's are actually a 1x. So 2x plus 3x is 5x, plus 1 more x, 6x, plus 1 more x, 7x, equals 434. Pull it over to the side to do our division. Goes in there 6 times, that would be 42. chose. So we would get x. Oops, I did not show my work. So since we were doing 7 times x, we would divide by 7 on both sides, which is what I showed doing over here. We would get x equals 62. But they want to know how many students chose each sport. So then we'd go back up here and we would fill in those numbers. So the number of students that chose lacrosse was 62. Remember lacrosse, because x equals 62 and lacrosse was just x. Swimming was the same, so that would also be 62. Football was 3 times that amount, so I would take 62 times 3 to get 186. Soccer was 2 times that amount, so I would take 62 times 2 to get 124. Make sure that you are reading the directions, because either they're going to ask you like for the equation, for what variables you'd represent them as. So like if they ask what variable would you use to represent soccer, your answer would be 2x. If they ask how many students chose soccer, your answer would be 124. So just make sure at the end of that question you're just paying attention to what they're asking for to make sure that you're answering that question correctly. All right, at this time I do want you to pause the video and try the next example on your own. If you want to kind of follow along to get it set up just to where we're listing out the names, you may, but I want you to try to do some of this stuff on your own, because you don't learn by just listening to how I process and how I do it. You learn by making mistakes and doing it on your own and then checking to see if it's correct. So I would like you to pause the video, try this next one on your own, and then just resume to check. All right, so at this time, hopefully we have this problem done. We are just checking our answer. At Prairie Elementary School, students are asked to pick their lunch ahead of time so the kitchen staff will know what to prepare. Monday, 6 times as many students chose hamburgers. So we have hamburgers as salads. The number of students who chose lasagna was 1/3 of the number of students who chose hamburgers. 225 students ordered lunch. How many chose hamburger, salad, lasagna? Okay, so we only have 3 options here. The one that they give us the least amount of information about is salads. They don't tell us how many times students chose salads. They tell us how many times students chose hamburgers to salads and lasagna to hamburgers. So they don't tell us anything about salads. So we've got to use X for salads. That's the one that they give us the least information about. And it's also the one that they compare to that isn't compared to anything else. Okay, so that's kind of how you can think through which one is the X that we start with. On Monday, 6 times as many students chose hamburgers as salads. So if salads is X, hamburgers is 6X. The number of students who chose lasagna was 1/3 of those who chose hamburgers, remember? So we could take 1/3 times 6, or we could take 6 divided by 3. Remember, multiplying by 1/3 and dividing by 3 are the exact same thing. So 6x divided by 3 would give us like a 2x. All right. So lasagna would be 2x. 225 students ordered lunch. We would add these up, 6x plus x plus 2x, because the amount that chose hamburgers plus the amount that chose salad plus the amount that chose lasagna would equal how many students we have that ordered lunch. We'd combine our like terms. We'd remember that that x is a 1x. So we'd have 7x, 8, 9x equals 225. That would be 2, 4, 5. I should be showing my work. I'm sorry. And we get 5. So what this means is the amount of students that chose salad was 25. They wanted to know how many students chose each option. So they don't want to know, is it 6x, x, or 2x? They want to know how many students. So if x is equal to 25, that means 25 kids chose a salad. If lasagna is 2 times that amount, we'd do 2 times 25, and we would get 50. For hamburgers, we would do 6 times 25. To get 150. All right, and that is how you write equations with one variable that represents different missing information in the problem.